All right, good afternoon, everyone. We'll call this meeting of the First District Commission Organizational Focus Committee to order, and the RISE work group. Members present, Dale Oliver, myself, Stephen Welch, Bruce Mandel, Andy Buccino, and that's the work group, and Val and I are the OSC. Can I get a motion to adopt the agenda?
So moved.
Okay, all in favor?
Aye.
Okay, no opposed, that carries unanimously. Minutes, we're waiting on HDC RISE work group related, 3 items on the agenda. One is, maybe we'll pick up the easier one first, the easier two first. One is the interest forms. Just so you guys know, we did discuss it, or I brought it up as a commissioner comment at the HDC last night that we will be posting the legal notice to see if anyone else is interested. We've done it for a couple of weeks. We'll put it up for another week. Can't hurt to see. Sure. The other is Dropbox or a similar file repository. Andy, you brought this up at the last meeting. I try to keep notes as we go and incorporate things as best I can. Yeah. And the idea here is, or maybe you put it in an email. The idea here was to be able to have common files and information and basically a repository of archival information. I say that as opposed to like Google Docs where we can all work on a document because now that you're in the public sphere, there's open meeting law. So we wouldn't actually be able to do any type of a collaborative effort on Google Docs because it would in fact be a violation of open meeting law. Okay. But my understanding is that simply using it as a repository of documents that have already been made public is totally fine, and it's something that if you don't mind setting up, it'd be very helpful. And sure. And then we can post a, staff can be made aware of it too.
Great.
Okay.
And what I'd like to do is keep a folder. So we'll do a Dropbox folder specific to the RISE group, and in that we can have minutes from previous meetings, agendas for future meetings. And then any documents that we start to build out that have been brought into the public record. So anything that this group touches, I'd like to keep there, so we all have quick access to the documents.
As a practical matter, I think given minutes are so far behind, I think what we should do is also include a folder that has a link to the meetings itself, each of the meetings, because they're all on YouTube.
Okay.
So at least that way nothing's being perceived as being not available. Okay. But I think it'd be good because trying to find those links, but trying to find links to these meetings isn't always as easy as just finding the answer to the select word. So it'd probably be good to do that too. Good with that? Sure. Okay. All right, so the next item of business was for today was to put together. Bear with me 1 second. Okay, where we left it was to list expectations with respect to the charter and some solutions each of us has as ideas. At this meeting, we not be getting into the meat and potatoes of a particular idea, but trying to get into how to structure the ideas that have been brought forth, including a timeline, no particular order, a timeline prioritizing, and whether the ideas themselves make sense given kind of what we have to work with. It would also give us an opportunity to discuss and try and determine what resources we have available to us. As of yet, extended and olive branch and crickets. So I don't think that's going to develop into anything. At proposed discussion at the last meeting. Just get my bearings. Okay. So what you have in front of you are two items. One is an email from Tim with, I think his idea, his solution, which if I can distill it down, will simply be guidelines for visibility and both within and outside the OHDs. And basically the elephant in the room, as he states, is to start to work together on conditions, situations, and neighborhoods where solar can be deployed to the front of the house. So that's one area of idea and solution. Well, the other thing you have in front of you is a little bit more involved, just because it tries to encompass the discussions we've had to date. I don't anticipate we're necessarily going to be able to go through this individually here this afternoon, but we can. The introduction part is simply an introduction, given the fact that this is going to be a public document and it needs to have some kind of parameters associated with it and some type of guidance as to what it is and what it's about, as opposed to just a list. We don't need to get into that at this point. You guys could please read through the first paragraph and the notes and give me your comments on that. We can discuss that at the next meeting. Information items, this is the portion of the document that lists all the things we've talked about. So we talked about definitions and glossary with respect to the work process and final recommendations. Primarily architectural integration of solar PV and thermal tech. So optimizing vent pipe penetrations, elimination of the sawtooth effect, magnitude of secondary mass areas required of typical Nantucket home. Magnitude of secondary mass areas basically trying to encourage secondary mass development on designs of both additions and new homes and incentivize that, because on a secondary mass, installations are more likely to be approved as a general matter. With respect to integration, we also discussed other types of solar shingles, what's now, what it looks like, how does it install, related pros and cons, and so on and so forth. On the topic of architectural integration, we've got two other ones: 35 Fairgrounds carport with the pergolas. The carport, also the concept of pergolas and other accessory structures of dual use. And then architect designers input on modified roof systems, which would actually be literally modifications to how roofs are designed and constructed, to see if there's some way to better integrate the solar tech. And I'm not saying necessarily simply and only the kind of old school rectilinear panels, but whatever it is. So I think just before we go through a list, we've got two different, those are really two different approaches. Not to say that they're mutually exclusive. What Tim put forth, and then the architectural integration. Do we want to kind of break this up and have a little bit of discussion on where these fit in as a general idea of priority? How do you guys want to approach it? Or do you want to go through the list and then go back through the list and prioritize stuff?
How are the approaches different?
Well, Tim's is the central focus is on visibility and allowing visibility on, well, Tim, interestingly enough, and no offense, Tim, because I think the idea was to get these things out on the table. Tim's is the position that Will asked why the HDC was defending a position that hasn't been asked to give up. That's what Tim's putting forth, is in a sense putting solar on the front of homes in visible locations. The other list is about how to make what is being installed better integrated and better disguised, so it's not necessarily on the front of the home. So relocating stack pipes, we'll be at the HDC sometimes and we'll hear testimony that, well, we can't put a panel here and here because there's a stack pipe for the plumbing vent, and therefore we need to put it on the front of the building. So, or, well, there simply isn't enough roof space spacing the correct cardinal points in order to install solar to make it viable. So we're proposing to install it on the front of the building. Those are the things we're trying to overcome with the integration aspect, where Tim's is more of a head-on visibility in the front. I want to just stress, I'm not making a qualitative comments on any of that. It's just to characterize them as I see them, and that if you guys see them differently, we can talk it through.
One question.
Yeah.
I think it's fair to ask the question, is for this organization and for the charter goals, whatever you want to call it, that we have in front of us, is that front of the house a viable discussion? And the reason I bring it up is this, that you look at the two differences in the two documents. One of them addresses maybe 5 to 10% of the problem, and the other one addresses like 50% plus of the problem. Not what, and that's a bad way to say it, of the situation in reality, right? So
I'd like to call it an opportunity.
yeah, opportunity. So if you look at it today with the current set of rules that we have and the HDC guidelines that are in place today, the addressable, the number of homes in Nantucket that can put solar on their home today is maybe at the high end, I would estimate professionally 30%, but it could be as low as 25%. Right? So maybe only 25 to 30% homes today can put solar on their house.
On roofs?
On roofs, we're talking about roofs, yes. With the current set of guidelines that are in place.
Okay, so I just want to be clear. I think I grasped
Let me finish,
this.
Stephen.
Oh, I'm sorry.
Yeah, and then, and my hypothesis is that without bringing in to play a discussion around where the front of the house can have solar, we're not really going to move. We can adjust the vent pipes, we can make recommendations on secondary structures. There's a whole bunch of really good things we can do, but I suspect it's not going to move the needle much, and we're not really going to allow that many more people to put solar on their homes, on their Nantucket,
On their roofs.
on their roofs.
On the front of their roof,
On, right,
in a
well,
visible location.
yeah. right.
Okay, I mean, just to be clear,
Yeah, and that's our charge.
so.
And it is an HDC work group.
So that, I think I want to just to facilitate, I think it's important that we come to a common definition of the problem. I think
It's the front of the building.
Tim has suggested that, the problem is the number of homes that can have solar put on the front of the home, which is limited. If the front of the home faces a primary street. The HDC's definition of the problem is dramatically different, which is how do we better integrate solar into the historic character and setting? So I think what we need to try and come to a realization of defining the problem in a common way, so we can be working to a common goal. If the definition is only putting solar on the front of a home, then I'm not quite sure I see that there's any real collaboration in that, because the current technology is so out of keeping. There's no historic context. So it's, when I say being on the front of homes, I mean like carte blanche on the front of every home,
No, well, that's.
unless it's in the historic district.
But, I think that is where the discussion needs to take place, because there has to be locations on Nantucket. I shouldn't say so strongly. I would think that there are places on Nantucket where putting solar on the front of the home should be completely acceptable. It's a brand new home in a brand new development, it's low income housing. It's an all electric home, and it just so happens that that house in that neighborhood on that street is on the north side of the street, and so it's not considered historic.
But the whole island needs to keep its character.
Let,
like-
let.
Okay.
So I'm with you.
I'm
Val.
sorry, I should have sat there. So
I understand that, but I think that the spirit of, at least my understanding, or the spirit of this is to try and come up with some neighborhoods, some areas where it would be okay. We're not, I think people are supportive of the HDC, where you're not gonna put solar on the front of the home or backs the road. Right when you're, a quarter mile from the White House, that's not gonna happen. But, and I think people support that, but when there are other neighborhoods that have been built within the last 3 years that are relatively dense housing, and they're all electric homes, and they're, in many cases, it's low income housing, to say we can't put solar on the front of the house, people, you just don't get it. And if we walk out of here, I feel if we walk out of here without a solution that addresses some of those really obvious ones, people are gonna go, well, what did you do?
Well,
You didn't move the needle.
you're asking us to start making exceptions for rules. For things that are not really something for us to consider. In other words. I'm not probably gonna phrase this properly, but. Low income housing. Should be exempt because it's low income housing. You know.
Okay,
and-
that's a start. That's a start.
Well, that's not under HDC's purview.
Well, no,
Correct,
I think
and that's
Bill.
what my point
I think Bill's saying that is not an example of something the HCC can get behind,
Right.
because we can't make an exception or rules based upon what type of housing it is. It's based upon the character and setting of the neighborhood and the surrounding neighborhoods. So I think this is good discussion, but I just wanted to clarify that you were saying this is not a good
Well, no, because then there's gonna
HDC
be
purview ratio.
somebody else who's gonna come in and say, well, you made an exception there, so let me pitch my exception, and the fact of the matter is. I don't know how to deal with this.
Okay, I do. So I'm gonna wait till Andy speaks and then I'll put out a suggestion. If you want to comment at this point.
Thanks for the prompt. I hadn't expected to, but I will. I just want to build off of Tim's comment, because the elephant in the room, as Tim has expressed it in his email, was the impetus for the town article last year.
So you're asking us to give up our,
I'm not, I'm expressing
Yeah.
what the town has expressed, or the voters expressed as a critical point that they'd like to see addressed. So I think what Tim is asking is if it's in the purview of this group to present, and I think a way to frame it is with a map. Are there levels of historic value or not? Are there tiers of historic validity? 1, 2, and 3, 1 through 7. Are there areas in town that would be less historically
cared about.
critical? No. Okay.
I live in Mid-Island
Yeah, I
and
do too.
everything gets dumped here, so I'm really sensitive about
No,
it.
I appreciate that. I understand that. It doesn't mean that there doesn't need to be a lot of hard work to define what that is, and with Nantucketer's input as someone that lives in Mid-Island, you and I may feel very differently about what that means from a solar perspective. I don't know. I may agree with you. But there are how many thousands of voters on the island? So can that map be used? And I think that's the position this group might take. Can we recreate or acknowledge what that map means to redefine what front-facing main mass roof can be presented with solar? And I think I can agree with Tim in that if that is not objectively an opportunity, for this group to present to the HDC. As Stephen and yourself are representatives of HDC, you're gonna present whatever opportunities this work group comes up with. I think Tim's question is an important one. Do you, Stephen and Val, see that as a non-starter, as a thing that you cannot, based on the purview of this work group, present to the HDC?
It was not my intention when we started this to categorize the island to allow solar and not allow solar. It was my understanding, trying to cooperate with the technology and come to some consensus about how you can integrate it, but still we keep our mission true to what it is, which is the visual of the island. So, I mean, this is good that we're talking about it, because I saw this coming from the very beginning.
So let's
I mean,
start
we're
here.
coming from two
Right.
different,
I
Perspective.
think we're on the same page.
I don't know.
I think, no. I think there's a little cleanup here that's required, because we can't proceed, and no offense to anyone, but a revisionist type of a historical perspective. The motion that was made, first of all, at the annual town meeting, the concept that was put forth was that the HDC would more reasonably accept solar. There was nothing in the article that indicated that the HDC would allow solar on the front of homes throughout the island in areas that aren't deemed by someone, whomever it is, whether it's a vote of 10% of the population or the HDC or some amalgamation. There was never, that was not in the article to determine, the article was to determine whether the HDC Act would be revised or proposed to the state to be revised that the HDC would more reasonably view solar. Now, what reasonable is, that's open to a lot of discussion and interpretation, because to the HDC, reasonably means that it's based upon what the HDC's mission is. The HDC's mission is to protect the character and setting of the historic landmark in the specific historic districts. The idea that it was all of a sudden about coming up with areas that the HDC would approve solar as just a matter of, course, as a matter of consent, was definitely not what was voted. And the motion that was made was that the HDC would create a work group that would be an HDC work group implicitly promoting the character and setting and protecting the character and setting of the island. And that specifically integrating solar, not necessarily just, forgive me, but slapping on the front of a house somewhere. So I think there's a very distinct difference in the recollection of the history, but my recollection based on the article itself and the motion I made and the discussion I put forward, I believe is very accurate.
I agree with the accuracy of your statement. I would say that we'd be foolish to consider that the spirit of any comments and presentations at the town would not include conceptually that solar would end up on the front of a roof.
Yeah, and I don't disagree with that. I'm not suggesting
That
that.
was the spirit behind it, not to say that it was expressed.
to ignore the HDC or take us out of the picture.
No.
No. I want to finish the tail end of mine. The idea here, I'm not suggesting that somehow the article that was put forth excluded putting solar on the front of a home. But it wasn't specific to putting solar on the front of a home. Most people who sit at town meeting, most people around the island who aren't involved in solar in any way, including they didn't come in for an application to an agent or to the HDC, have because they have no reason to be involved or no specifics of what is or isn't permitted. The result of that vote was that 4-1, they said, take it to a work group that the HDC determines and is in keeping with the HDC's mission. Having said that, I think we can move past that. I don't want to be stuck in a framing of what the problem is that isn't consistent with why we are here. Tim, you come up with the idea of condition of areas that may allow solar to be approvable. I think that it's much more reasonable for a variety of reasons, which I'll state in a moment, that we focus on what conditions, what site-based conditions would allow that. Proximity to a road, low slope, high slope, on a dormer on the front of a house, at a dead end, so on and so forth. Because the HDC, for a variety of reasons, I think the lifting of, creating specific overlay areas is problematic for a couple of reasons. One, aside from the OHD, the old historic district in town, and the Wisconsin old historic districts, which are more or less easy to delineate until you get into the buffer areas, and then there's a big potential discussion there that is going to be very difficult to resolve. We also have the rural character and setting that is a big identity of the island, and in fact, the second time the HDC went to the Secretary of the Interior, that rural setting was part of the historic designation for the historic landmark of the island. A lot of people don't know that, they don't understand that, but so for instance, I'll give you a specific example. Quidnet, not the proper Quidnet, but in the areas leading up to Quidnet. If we were to come up with a map that said this whole area, because it's rural, is allowed to have solar, that would actually be in contradiction to the historic setting. So that's where it gets problematic. The other area that is problematic is the legalities of it. It would have to be voted at town meeting for sure, I presume. The way everything else that has to do with an overlay district is typically voted in the and if it wasn't voted on directly as a matter of zoning, it would need to be voted on as a matter of the HDC establishing a district. So I'm not suggesting that that can't happen, but that opens up a whole different set of potential issues. I think that where we could be most successful is if we, and this is where there's a lot of lifting involved, but I think it's practical lifting, given our limited resources, is we focus on a list of the conditions that would allow solar on the front of a home. And those that would exclude solar on the front of the home. And then we can simply create a matrix, and maybe we can value these. So on the front of a home on a primary road is a 0. Trees in front of it is a 3. On a dormer roof where it won't be visible is a 5. I'm not suggesting, I'm just very simplistically, so that we can come up with a weighting
I
system.
agree.
Yeah.
I would be all for that. We would, right, because you're
Yeah.
giving people hope.
Yeah, this is just I'm just trying to communicate on
The zoning
what I'm seeing
idea,
now.
the zoning was just one concept, one idea.
I get it, and I'm not trying to shoot it down, I'm just trying to advance.
If we
discussion.
fast forward 6 months from now.
Yeah.
We walked out of here. And someone comes to an installer and says, I want to put solar on my home, and it's in this dead end street in the middle of nowhere, it's a single story, it happens to be on the front of the home. And if we turn around and say, no, that's not going to improve, they'll be, I think they would seriously ask the question, like, well, what did you guys do?
Yeah, no, I don't get that. I don't disagree with you, but I also would suggest that if we're still here in 6 months, somebody else is gonna be sitting in my seat.
Well, if we don't
Amen,
spend,
amen.
Yeah.
So let's get
know.
well, if we don't address this opportunity, then there's no reason for us to spend more than, maybe 4 or 5 more meetings on the other list. Right? I think Tim's proposal, Tim's concept, and your acknowledgement of that is probably 80% of the work that we would need to do.
Right, and so, well, yes and no. So I think if we get into some of the other topics like camouflage, cardinal point orientation, the azimuth angle, the tilt, the elevation, the minimum kilowatts, maybe not so much, but to some extent, look, what I've tried to do without getting into the details of it, because I didn't want to tip my hat too much, is the idea that we're coming up with those conditions that would either allow or dissuade installation, including such things as conditions that could be applied to either mitigate camouflage or demonstrate that the minimum required is being proposed. What's the typical kilowatt hour for a Nantucket home? This home compares to that typical home in that it is a little bit less, and that is all we're asking for versus coming into the HDC and asking for something that would appear to be like 3 times what's necessary, so that the individual can then get money back and make money when there's nothing wrong with someone making money, believe me, I have absolutely no concern about it, but we're in a historic landmark. So if you're gonna create what, not everyone, but some would consider a blemish, my belief is that we need to be protecting the minority, not the majority. That's our role at the HDC, because frankly, if you think about it, people would build whatever they wanted to, and they would build whatever they could to maximize the dollars. But I'm not saying everyone, but some people, and if the HDC isn't there to protect the minority view, then that's where we run into the problem. So that's what I'm trying to set up.
And it's, Steve, I think those are relatively easy to address.
Yeah,
Right?
well, I think.
We have
yeah.
all that data for you. We can happy to share that kind of stuff with you. That's it's super easy.
Okay, and the only other thing I would just want to say, just kind of on macro of the environment is, I think there's going to be a little bit of sensitivity until we get to know each other a little bit more than just our interactions, not on this particular topic. We are, as HCC members, are under a lot of pressure. We're attacked by certain people. I'm not suggesting anyone here, but there's like a vocal minority, super minority. And the perception when we sit at the desk, and you know, I got big shoulders, I can take it, it's fine. But the perception is, well, wait a minute, we're trying to protect the historic district and the character and setting of the National Historic Landmark. And we're kind of being put upon that, you know, well, for instance, what went out to the students, I don't want to pick on a scab, but the HDC is perceived as an obstruction to addressing climate change. What the hell is that? I would have said WTF, but I can't say it out loud. There's no basis for that. There's no reason to enter that into the dialogue. I'm simply saying all that to get back to the point that there is a sensitivity, I think, on our side for certain reasons. Tim, with yours on certain types of installations. I think over the course of the next couple of meetings, we'll kind of stew this down and we'll be in a better position when we're discussing that no one is defensive and or necessarily defensive, or like, for instance, I'm not attacking the idea of the zoning overlays. I'm just jumping right into the meat of it and getting to the idea of conditions instead. I think it's a wonderful idea if we could come up with that. I don't think it's practical for the reasons I stated. Anyways, I don't want to go too far into that, but it's just, if you kind of think about that, I think it will be beneficial for everyone to understand that we're here to work together in a collaborative sense. I appreciate the fact that you all are, and we'll keep going from there. I kind of like to go through the rest of the list, and maybe what we could do is determine what of these directly or indirectly relate to conditions under which solar may be put on the front of a home in a matrix or some other form. And maybe we can just quickly go through the list, and then we can have a little bit of discussion on
Can
them.
you make an action item, come up with that list?
Yeah, I think the action item is going to be how, well, the current action item is to figure out how we use the list we have to solve the problem we agree is the common problem. And I think before we move forward, let me just, as a facilitator, ask, is our perceived priority problem a list of conditions that would allow or exclude solar on the front of a home?
What?
Is that what we think is our priority? Like, it's on a dead end street, on a dormer, and it's only the amount of solar that's needed for the home.
But how are we ever gonna know that?
Well, that's what part of the rest of the list is. That's an example.
That's a good example.
I'm just saying, is that where we want to head first? Is how do we address those homes that under the current guidelines may be perceived as just a non-starter? When in fact, we have approved homes on a dead end. Mayhew Lane, I think it is. What's the one over by off a New Lane?
There is a Mayhew there.
Yeah, there's one at that end of that street. I think that's the street, and it's on a dead end street. It's right on the front of it. It's a ranch style
And
home.
it's not just the front, right? There's a lot of examples where we've got clients' comments on the side of them, and it's still.
Yes.
It's very visible.
Yeah.
But it meets all those other criteria. It's in a super modern neighborhood that's just gone up in the last 2 years. It's.
I would suggest that we try and take small chunks and develop successes early and
Yeah.
build upon those before we get into the more challenging, like subdivision wide and new homes in
So I'm
Wisconsin.
okay with that, but from your perspective, I would also say. There's gonna be examples of, historic downtown Sconset where it's at the dead end of the street and it meets all the criteria.
Right, but I think that, I don't
Right.
disagree with you, I think, but I guess this is what I'm trying to say, as opposed to getting into more examples of what we're trying to solve.
Yeah.
If, I think we have enough information maybe to determine if what we're trying to solve at this point is a priority. Is simply, what are the conditions under which solar would be allowed on the street side visible location? And I was using one example to move the ball forward in discussion, which is, it's on a dead end.
But I think to say just
Yeah.
visible from a public way, right? Those
Yeah.
are the,
Yeah, I'm not trying to bracket, I'm not trying to bracket the outcome by saying it that way, I'm just trying to move, and an example of what we would develop on the same list of what would dissuade installation is it's on the front of a home on New Lane. On a Cape style home, completely visible from New Lane. That would be negative points. So we could develop, the idea is to develop some way of a weighting system based on the different conditions, the circumstances and variables, which isn't that hard to do. We do a analytical hierarchy priority type of a mapping system. It's what do we as a group identify as favorable and disfavorable weighted towards the HDC, who's ultimately the determining factor. Without bracketing it, without saying, I'm just trying to use extreme examples without, using the
I
three
think
bricks.
we should try it. I'm all for trying it, see where, see where you land.
All right, and are you comfortable with moving forward with the idea of like trees? Like we.
Yeah, yeah,
Okay,
I just can't embrace a blanket. It's okay here.
yeah, I understand. That's why I'm trying to steer us away from that because I think it's problematic. Bruce, and then we'll go to the list.
I'm starting to understand what you're doing here. One question I have, and I'd like to have your answer, please, is how do we intend for communities to have input before these systems are embraced and put forward?
Can you repeat the question, please?
How do you intend for the various communities that these rules and parameters that you're setting up, trees, dead end streets, low income, things like that, how do you intend for those communities and those homeowners to have some input before you finalize this matrix and system for determining where solar panels get to create a different dynamic in a community?
Sure, totally understand. Thank you for repeating it. That would be a public hearing process at the HDC level. We may do one as a work group. We're empowered to do that. So depending on, I would hesitate to say specifically it's one or the other. It may be both. It may be one, it may be at the organizational focus committee level and then for input. I think on the legality side of it, the HDC would need to be, I'll have to double check this, but the HDC to make a regulation would be required to have a public hearing process, or at least a public meeting process. And that's when those types of matters would be reviewed and addressed in a public forum and the public would have an opportunity to comment. I believe it would be a welcome event. And, it's going to be a matter of, kind of determining the specifics of what's required and why as we got nearer to such a date and an event.
So it's more of an after the fact than a participation in coming to the decision. For example, we decide that these are appropriate in all electric low income housing neighborhoods. And now we're gonna have a public hearing on discussing that decision, rather than having the input from the low income all electric community as we develop our standards.
Okay, so I think, as I understand your point, I believe, I think as a practical matter, one, the HCC doesn't make determinations based upon income. We make decisions based upon character and setting.
That was your expression, low income house.
No, that was one example that was brought up, and we were saying the HCC does not make those.
So
So
I understand.
I understand you're using it as an example, but I want to be clear for the record that we don't make decisions based upon that.
That's understood.
Okay, so, the other element is that, yeah, Bruce, I get, you're looking for transparency, you're looking for people the opportunity to have input. That's why we have a work group that is meeting publicly and televised. People can come here and they can attend. It's impractical to come up with, we have a list, well, I developed a 4-page list of different relevant items. We would be here for 2 years if we had a public, and I'm not being flippant, if we had a public hearing on every single one of these. And given the number of people who expressed interest on the interest forms or showed up publicly, it would be a waste of time because no one is participating.
It wasn't well advertised and it wasn't well presented.
Well, it was presented as a legal notice, which is the requirement. And you're welcome to speak to other people and you guys, and we sent an email out to architects, designers, and people on the HDC mailing list. To suggest it wasn't well advertised, I think is ill-informed. And I also think that the idea that the public has input is an important part of the process to me, to Val, to everyone here. But it also has to be practical. And the practical way to do that is to conduct meetings in open, to conduct deliberations in open meeting publicly, and to post it on the town calendar, which we do. And people are welcome to come and talk, and they're welcome to view, break out the popcorn maker and watch the videos. And if they've got an issue, they can come in and talk. So does that answer your question?
No, but I understand where you're going.
Okay, well, I think I tried to honestly answer your question.
Well, you did.
And I think I did a pretty good job of it.
Okay.
Not to be personal about it, but we can't. If you have a dissatisfaction with the process, I think it would be beneficial for you to voice it now. Like is in this moment.
I've just gotten this 4-page document. First time I'm seeing it.
Yeah,
I think I'd like a chance to digest what's in this.
okay, but that's not what we're talking about.
Oh, sure.
No, it's not. You brought up a point that you feel the public should be involved in a public hearing process. Or we're making decisions on behalf of the public before they have a chance to be involved. I explained why that's not true and why it's impractical to do it other than we're doing it. If you have a concern about that, I'm asking you to voice it now. You're bringing up a separate topic, which is a document that was meant to be presented to you at this meeting for later review by you individually.
My question was how we intended to engage these potential communities and neighborhoods that you're talking about. And what you're saying is they're welcome to come to a work group and they're welcome to make their feelings expressed as it moves along.
Yes, because that's the resources we have available, Bruce. We don't have a staff who can set up public meetings and book venues and have people like us go to these meetings and spend, in addition to the hours we're spending here in preparation and then in discussion, multiple additional hours. It's kind of like when you go to visit relatives, you let them know where you're going to be and they're welcome to come, or you can go visit every single relative in that area. One of them is impractical. It's very stressful. It's very difficult to do. We're doing the one where we're going to visit the area and we're saying, hey, we're going to be here. We would love to see you all. Please drop in at any time. That's what we're doing.
Would it be appropriate to reach out to an entity such as the Civic League, who has 30-something neighborhood associations associated with it, to say, hey, we've got this plan coming up, and we'd like to offer you the opportunity to participate?
No, I don't believe it would be. I believe it would be appropriate for two reasons. One, it's way premature because we don't have any document. And two, it would be much more appropriate to put out to the Civic League would you all like to, inform your membership that there is a work group or a meeting to discuss these topics? The problem with doing it the latter way, as you probably know, Bruce, being a successful businessman, is that, well, I'm not gonna get into the details of it. I think we've covered a variety of why we're doing what we're doing as a practical matter and a reasonable manner in the way that most municipalities and volunteer work groups function, is you have public meetings, you invite the public to come and attend, you put it on an agenda so they know what's going to be talked about on the town calendar, and you go from there. Tim, please.
I don't know how to stop at 4:45, 4:50.
Okay, thank you.
And
Yeah.
I could just,
Does anyone disagree before we move on with?
no, I just want to reference the beginning of the meeting where we said there's a few more weeks for interest forms to be submitted. And so someone from the Civics League could submit an interest form to participate in this work group.
Yeah, and as I said,
It's still open,
we
so,
welcome the
Right.
involvement.
so that's an excellent opportunity for someone to engage and participate at a pretty nuanced level throughout the process.
Okay, thank you. And Bruce, thank you for the question. I think it's important to get that stuff on the table early. Hopefully not often. So the next topic, just to get back to where we were a little while back, is what I've asked for you guys to do is just consider, what time is it now? Okay, I think what I'd like to do is go through this list, ask if you have any particular questions. The goal in mind being that you take a look at the list with respect to solving our problem. Solving our problem is, what of these relate to conditions that would either tend to allow or preclude solar on the front of the home? And then accordingly, label these with a priority number in your own time, so at the next meeting, we can try to finalize this list and with an eye towards what are the most important elements in accomplishing the goal. Does that make sense to you all?
Yeah.
Okay, does anyone have a concern about that? Okay, so camouflage, we talked about, Tim, you guys have been wonderful. You provided some materials, samples, skins along those lines. You guys can read the details.
Where are those?
Where what?
Where are those samples that he provided?
They were
This was
provided,
on a specific application a
Yeah.
while back,
Oh.
yeah, it wasn't for the work group.
but
So-
in Pearl's house.
So, Bruce, it's a good question, though. Part of the process that we would undergo is getting some samples and getting some pictures of what they look like installed. So we have an idea in discussion. Others, compare and contrast. So this is an area number 4 that I really wish we would have had some resources available to us to look at what other communities who have a comparable historic district, what their solutions have been.
I think we can still ask Lauren for that. I can take the action item to ask Lauren, because I think that occurred to me, that's something perfect for those guys. right?
Yeah, and that's actually one of the ones we brought up early in our process, one of our asks. I've been looking at historic districts in Chicago, around Massachusetts. You'd be amazed at what they don't approve and we approve. You'd be shocked. Cardinal point orientation and elevation, so the azimuth angle and the tilt, getting an idea of well, what is ideal, but what still works. So that would be something maybe we could be looking into. Minimum kilowatt hour required for a typical Nantucket build out with the variables and assumptions outlined in fairly reasonable detail. That relates to number 7, sizing and return.
Just comment on it.
Yes. That's-
Yeah, please, go ahead.
Quick comment on those ones. So, I mean, real back of the envelope, we typically don't go forward with a project unless it's 4 kilowatts.
Okay, I'm gonna ask to you
I'll
hold
write it
that.
down. I'll write it down.
Yeah, because we'll get into the details once we prioritize it, we'll get into the details. And I'm
the
speaking-
the other thing on the sizing, so, and because you made some comments earlier about the economic viability and stuff. In almost 100% of cases, a system is sized to be between 90 and 100% of their electric use. So I don't know of circumstances, we've never done anything where we would oversize for revenue. We're not building power stations,
Sure.
right? We're in the business of eliminating people's existing, and maybe maybe we oversize a little because they're converting to heat pumps.
Okay,
Right.
but this is the only thing, Tim, and I appreciate it. When I mentioned that, I was trying to use a little bit of I'm trying to, outline the playing field for going forward. And then I want to address your comment in the context of, one sec, in the context of my facilitating the meetings.
Yeah.
I was using slight hyperbole based upon anecdotal evidence when we sit at the table and we see a small cottage come in with X amount of panels. And then we see a large house come in and it has the same amount of panels. Something isn't working there. You gave some specific examples, or a specific example and kind of a little bit of a rebuttal, which I understand. What I'm gonna ask is, let's go through the list. We're gonna have plenty of time to talk about all that detail when we get to this specific topic.
Right.
It's just, if you have a fundamental question about what is this element, what is this item about? I don't understand what you're asking me to prioritize. Is that okay?
Mhm.
Okay. Solar garden, let's see, sizing and returns. So basically, the comment, this speaks to the comment, you made and I made, Tim. To be determined roof versus ground array. That is a different element of sizing and returns. It brings into different, different discussion, which is the efficacy, the trade-offs, environmental effects, etc. All of which we can discuss at a later time. Hopefully start to get into this at the next meeting. The next one is, this doesn't speak directly to being on the front of a house on the roof, front being the primary roadway, but solar garden and cluster installation. So this is kind of tangential. I think it would be one that we want to prioritize in the mix, and we'll probably end up separating it out for side discussions to try and develop it. A couple of these don't fit necessarily as neatly as the first.
Question.
Yeah.
So what's the relevance of AIDS for the group?
So that it's an option. So basically.
For those neighborhoods you're talking
Yeah,
about,
exactly.
instead of
Yeah.
having them on every roof.
I'm like, that's where I
Yeah.
thought you might be going, but
Yeah.
to me, to take that to its like logical conclusion. It would seem then that when a developer gets up in, a housing developer gets up in front of the HDC. The HDC would say, I don't see anywhere on this map, anywhere on
Right.
this plan, where your solar garden's going in.
I would go one step further. I would suggest that, we might make a recommendation that the town consider through its apparatus appropriately. Integrating these types of cluster installations into the zoning bylaw or the town code.
Yeah.
And then
'Cause
not
that's the level.
not as a matter of the aesthetics, but as a matter of provisioning. And then the details of making sausage gets resolved at the HDC level.
Alright.
Screening and so on and so forth. So, yeah, I mean, that's
Right.
definitely one that I think is an important one, and frankly, it could have as much of an effect, if not more of an effect, over time, for a variety of reasons, including when an area is rezoned. We'll get into the details when we get into it. Is that fair? Okay. General tip sheet, this I think is just, this is more of a residual, a product of the work. For new and existing structures, to include the permitting process examples of reasonable and conversely unreasonable expectations. Information about the Nantucket Historic Landmark context and so on and so forth. So that'll be more like I would suggest that'll be a low priority, not with respect to the final product, but with respect to prioritizing what we need to be working on first. So maybe there's two categories of priorities. Would you guys consider this? One is overall relevance to the work group. And then the other is timeline priority. Does that make sense to you guys? Okay. And I'll send a quick email out that indicates the two. Overlay districts, we spoke about that. Won't get into that. I kind of touch on those. Don't take advantage to the reference to visual noise, but visual noise number 11 is an important one. from the idea, that is visual disharmony of architectural elements within historic context amongst the character and setting of a particular neighborhood or historic feature like the rural area in Quidnet. Again, put that into the timeline of solving for and overall. Let me write that down. Conjoined items, group A. So this is basically, this is, I think, information for the HDC. I think it does have relevance if we were going to be going as a community whole hog on installation island-wide. Useful life, depreciation of the energy return, things related to that. Important matters like, well, I'm not going to get into the details. Current installation cost and rebate. Forecasted installation cost and rebate. Again, that sounds obtuse, but when you read through it, it makes sense. There's a full paragraph there. Return on reinvestment forecasting chart. When you look at those concepts together, that's why they're called conjoined. It will make sense, I hope. Conjoined items group B is I gotta refresh my memory here. Oh, that was to like a look back. I think Andy, you might have brought up in relation to kilowatt hours is like, okay, this is what the models say, but what actually really happened out there.
Yeah, we talked about that briefly.
Yeah, so I think I just wanted to respect the comment. It seemed like it was, the other part of this was a discussion I had, I believe, with you quite a long time ago is, this is actually what it's about. Model a kilowatt load for the, that portion of square footage of homes constructed over the last, say, 5 years with respect to particular ceiling heights in excess of code 7 foot. So look, we're looking at what this particular item is about is what else can we do that affects the historic character, which is the size of buildings and their perception of the size of the buildings. If every home that has been built with 10, 11, 10.5 foot ceilings, 9, 10, 10.5 foot ceilings on 2 stories over several thousand square feet were built. I'm not suggesting that this is where we go, but I think it'd be useful information. Were built with code required ceilings of 7 feet. Commercial code is 7.6. That cubic volume is a tremendous amount that needs to be conditioned. And if the real concern is for the community, this concept of what is our electrical use and to prevent, what can we do to prevent the necessity for a third core for the mainland? Well, then this is a concept that I believe has some merit. I'm not saying we would know to the nth degree, but I think just a reasonable, put out some reasonable assumptions and come up with some reasonable calculations, basically to inform the community somewhere within our recommendations about, well, if you're looking for 10-foot ceilings, and then you want to put solar across the front of your home on New Lane, there's not a quid pro quo there. You are getting everything, and the historic character and setting is getting a negative return. So this would give a little bit of numerical value to what those types of things are. Insulation at code minimum versus maximizing the R value, maximizing air sealing. What are we losing in terms of cost of electricity by kilowatts, which translates to these other issues of requiring a more solar or more sustainable energy alternatives versus not requiring them at all. This may be a low priority in terms of, certainly in terms of our primary goal, which is conditions to further installations, or the guides of what can be installed on the front and what probably wouldn't be. But it seems to me, I just asked you to consider that. The other one I'd ask you to consider, okay, go ahead, Tim, I'm sorry. I'm just cognizant of the fact that we're leaving.
I know. You make good points, interesting points. My reaction is, how far is that the HDC's And shouldn't we just make a blanket statement to the effect of, we recommend that all homes are built to whatever code and standard with regard to insulation, volumes, whatever. We don't need, because it's really not.
Right.
The HDC's purview is sort of a visual aesthetic, not really the insulation between the walls.
I agree with Tim. I've got some.
And all the thickness of the book, maybe the thickness, but you know what I'm saying. I'm just wondering if we're like overstepping a little bit and run the risk of really getting ourselves into areas we don't know.
So two quick comments. One, and not to cut you off, but to direct us back to what we're trying to accomplish here this afternoon. The HCC's purview is definitely with respect to height. An extra 2 feet in each story is a large amount of mass. So, correct, that is part of the purview. I understand about the insulation levels. Glazing is one that I didn't mention that is part of the HCC's purview. 50% fenestration on a structure, it yields a tremendously different energy use profile. But these are the discussion you want to have, we're going to have when we can focus on the topic.
Yeah, I'll just say 12 and 13, I feel the same about. I think they're useful, but they're gonna be low on my priority list.
Yeah, and
But I have notes on efficiency for myself to understand how the work that I do might inform some of this discussion. So we'll just leave it at that, but I will put that low on the priority list, but I think it's a vital concern.
Yeah. And again, that's why I thought we would have two priority lists. One is timeline. I'll recap in a quick email. And not to shut off discussion, but I don't want to have like a 30-second discussion where everyone speaks about a topic like this. Like, we're going to literally go through the list once we prioritize it to make use of our time, and then we'll focus on them accordingly. The waste stream reclamation, I think, is a similar topic as to 12 and 13. It's low with respect to the solving for conditions that would either front of the house conditions versus overall project community information, HDC information. And it's the waste stream reclamation we talked about over various meetings. It gets into the concept of such things as well. What happens if we go to 50% of Nantucket homes, trying to map out and forecast 50% of Nantucket homes get solar, and then in 5 years, the technology becomes so much cheaper and so much more effective that those all got to go to the landfill, which is trying to close. Not to dissuade solar, but so we have a responsible handle on it. It's kind of like, in a way, and I don't know when this construes this, like if we knew about PFAS, an example, I know it's a bad example, I'm not trying to get the connotation, but it's the one that comes to mind. What would we have done differently implementing it? Would we have been a little more circumspect? Would we have, I don't know, but I think that it's important information. It's not important information in terms of a high priority for solving front of the house solutions. I think it's an element for discussion at a later point in the process, or a subsequent discussion by the community. But I wanted to include it because it came up in is that fair?
Yep.
Sure. Next steps, I just asked you to please read, I'm going to kind of go over it really quickly for the benefit of the public. So after recently determining items above to be added to the list, under a just do it, parentheses, consider and draft next steps, including the following list, which is itself a draft: managing the information list, build out, explore, then condense into reasonable format, how to approach the list of items, some of which are complex, including where applicable to reasonably acknowledge some may be great in concept, but due to resources or a quick cost time benefit analysis, they are impractical for the current review. That is the workforce review. Then item ranking, which actually, I guess, we just talked about. We can simplify it. You guys can follow this. Item ranking could be minimally required, strongly desired, or helpful but not currently essential. And prioritization could be perhaps 1, 2, 3. So maybe what you could do is using minimally required, strongly desired, or helpful but not currently essential is just use the first 2 letters of the first 2 words put those next to one of the 14 items, and then put a number with respect to prioritization. Is that too fast?
No.
Okay.
You didn't build this spreadsheet.
Yeah. I gotta sleep. I've got to get that hour in. Resources, seek to identify resources to carry the primary research and data presentation loads. And in relation, requirements, any requirements for access to or development of such resources, including their respective capacities, timelines, etc. I think that's kind of on hold at the moment.
I apologize, guys,
Yeah.
I gotta get to know you. I am here next week, but then unfortunately, I'm traveling for 2 weeks after next week, so maybe. You know-
I'm hoping to get us set up on Zoom, by the way.
Oh, okay, so maybe I can do that.
Yeah, it's a scheduling thing, so we're working on it.
Then I will, if you can, I will attend.
Okay, I hope you found this useful and productive. I think it
It's a
was,
journey.
yeah, it's about being happy along the way. Happiness is in the destination. So deliverables will be just a rinse and repeat of what we just did, once we've kind of mulled these out and come up with some meat and potatoes for the different items. That'll include, in of itself, timelines for deliverables, including any particular format, spreadsheets versus word processing, illustrations, and then at a later date, we'll get into the particular format, determine for recommendations to modifying the existing guidelines, and the eye on the living document with respect to technical advancements, obsolescence, etc. Lastly, for sake of clarity, foregoing is likely to be an iterative process. Below the fold, these are basically notes. They're not private notes. They're, they've been discussed, but they're not part of that first group of items or related matters. So these could be items that below the fold, the concept is matters like say 12, 13, and 14 may slip down to below the fold. So they're not part of what we're currently doing, but they're something that as a work group, we felt was important and we want to track. Or below the fold could be concepts that somebody brings up in a meeting. Bruce brought up a concept of community involvement. If there were more work involved or discussion by the work group, it would go on the below the fold sheet. So it serves a couple of different purposes. It's kind of like a living note summary for a note of something we either would like to do, we would like to discuss doing, or we think has value that we'd like to bring up at a later date. Does that? Okay,
Makes sense.
and those are self-explanatory. You guys can look through them. They're not meant to steer or direct conversation. They're simply some thoughts that I had. Okay. Thoughts on the process? Are we headed in the right direction?
I think so. It's not too late to add to the information items.
No, please. Yeah, I actually, that's exactly what should be next. Do you want to go over your list?
I didn't bring it with me today. I'm pleased to see this. I think it's excellent. Thank you for making 14 pointed comments on really important items.
I wish I could say it was my pleasure.
I'm sure it wasn't. But
No, it's labor of love. I'm fine with it.
well, this it's a great document that expresses much of what's been talked about offline, much of what's been, if not most, or all of what's been talked about in these meetings. So I think it's a great baseline and an excellent start. I look forward to reading through it in the next week and adding any comments and adding to the list. I do have a couple of things I'd like to throw on here.
Okay, so along the lines of adding to the list, I would urge you all, if you have anything that you would like to add, it's not mandatory, but try and get it done over the weekend so it can be distributed through staff on Monday and people can kind of go through and prioritize.
Sure.
That the ranking scheme outlined in next steps number 1. And it'll just make a cleaner meeting at the next meeting. The other thing I want to suggest is, based on the kind of alphanumeric ranking system, it should be obvious, but there's gonna be a lot of ones and twos and threes. It's not just gonna be, this is the most important priority, and then this one. It's just general classes of priority. Are you good with that? You're looking at me like I don't wanna do homework.
I don't. I already have enough.
I get it. Well, I think it'll be relatively painless. I hope it'll be relatively painless. Bruce, would you like to add anything at this point? Thoughts on kind of where we're going?
Have the opportunity to
Yeah,
dig
please.
into this, please.
Yeah.
I made notes on this. Is there a second clean copy available that I can,
Right here.
Yeah,
oh, thank you very much.
and actually, I think what I'll do is, through staff, I'll email you a copy. And I'll go ahead and I just want to be clear, I'm gonna move 12, 13, and 14 to below the line.
Okay.
And I'll label them as informational. Or something along those lines. So when you get this document, you'll have a Word version, and then that way, if you want to add to it, you can. If you want to make notes, highlight, underline something in your word processing document, application, you can. If you want to just print it out and mark it up, you're welcome to do
I'm gonna
that.
send us an updated version with 12, 13, 14, which
Yeah.
below the fold.
All right, and then please, like I said, get, if you can, get it out, anything you'd like to add to it. So at the next meeting, everyone has had an opportunity to prioritize and rank. What do you got, Adrian?
I've got 451.
Nice, okay. Is there anything anyone else would like to add?
No,
Okay,
Motion to adjourn.
that's a good add. Thank you so much, Al. On your motion, Bill, Andy,
aye.
Bruce. And for the OFC, votes count as such. Okay, so that's unanimous. Adrian, thank you for coming in short notice.